Thank you very much, Anna, for the nice introduction. Before I start, I want to say a couple of things. Welcome everybody to this talk. I am also very excited, as Anna was explaining before, because this is a kind of culmination of all the thinking that we've been doing in the last 1.5 years or so about the topics and the areas where joint research could be done. So I want to thank very dearly the group at the University of Extremadura for holding this first seminar on our project, which gives us the opportunity to exchange our first impressions and thoughts on the preliminary analysis of the data that we gathered earlier in the year. And second, I want to apologize for not being there today with you, like in the flesh, although we're very close in many aspects, academically and personally as well. We are very far away physically, and the infrastructures in both of our communities are not as good as desired, and therefore, well, I cannot be there today, but I hope we can still enjoy the day together, even if it is virtually. Today, I'm going to give a very brief presentation in which I will try to contextualize a little bit the project, the coordinated project, and I'm going to focus on the sub-project at the Universidad de La Rioja, and I'm going to give you some preliminary thoughts on the data that we have had the time to analyze so far. So let me see. Yeah. So I'm going to give you some background information on lexical studies. I'm going to talk about the main variables that are usually explored and that we specifically have explored in the realm of lexical studies. I'm going to talk a little bit about the instruments that we have used in the project, and also very briefly about some of the implications that that we have started to see in our analysis. We're working from a lexical perspective, and mainly for some time in La Rioja, we have been looking into studying from different angles the construct of lexical competence, which basically refers to the knowledge of vocabulary and how to use it. We also realized that this notion of lexical competence is very closely related to other competencies, to other abilities, to other capacities, and specifically to the idea of a strategic competence, which is the ability, or can be defined as the ability to use different steps or stratagems to carry out learning and communication and to compensate for lack of knowledge, for instance, for lack of lexical knowledge. So, and these together with other competencies make up the bigger notion, the bigger construct of communicative competence, which is popular in the, or which is central in the Common European Framework of Reference. We also realize that when we talk about the lexical competence, there are some cognitive strategies that are related to how words are organized in the mind and how they are accessed, and that in a way are also related to what our colleagues in the at the Universidad de Extremadura have come to call metaphorical competence. So this is where we thought there might be some lines of some commonalities, some aspects where we can, where our research comes together, or where we can collaborate. And in this sense, I found this a bit older quote, but which I like very much because I think it very well represents what I am saying right now, I think it very well represents how lexical competence can be examined from different perspectives, such as psycholinguistic, cultural, and cognitive, which is precisely what we try to do in the present project. So if you allow me to read, the quote says, communicative language competence relates to cognitive organization and the way this knowledge is stored. For instance, the various associative networks in which the speaker places a lexical item. So what are the relationships that are established in the mind among the different lexical items? And to its accessibility, for instance, how they are activated, how they are recalled, how quickly they're made available to the learner, to the speaker when they need it. Its organization and accessibility will vary from one individual to another and vary also within the same individual, depending on a number of issues. For instance, depending on the plurilingual competence of the speakers. It can also be held that the cognitive organization of vocabulary and the storing of expressions depend, among other things, on the cultural features of the community or communities in which the individual has been socialized or where they are, and where their learning has occurred or is occurring. So this quote summarizes our main objectives, which I will be talking about in a minute: the psycholinguistic objectives, the cultural objectives, and the cognitive objectives. So some of the characteristics of the lexical studies that we've been dealing with are the following. We have tried to focus on vocabulary, on foreign language vocabulary from a second language acquisition perspective. For us, it is important to conduct empirical studies where lexis, where vocabulary is the center, is the object of the study. And more recently, we have also included bilingualism and multilingualism as a variable within vocabulary acquisition. So we're not experts in bilingualism or multilingualism, but we examine this phenomenon as a variable in lexical studies or in vocabulary acquisition and production. We have carried out comparisons of what we call traditional monolingual and bilingual or multilingual learners. A traditional monolingual learner would be, according to our definition, those students who are brought up mainly monolingual in the home and who start learning a foreign language at school. Mainly, it is English. These monolingual learners, these children, usually start learning the foreign language very, very early, at the age of 3. So defining them as absolute monolinguals is something that we're not sure about, okay? Because their acquisition of the foreign language starts at a very, very early age. Our studies have stretched from primary to secondary and university levels, and always we make the effort to control for hours of exposure to the foreign language wherever it is possible, or for proficiency level, as we have done in the present study. So as I was saying before, bilingualism for us is a variable of vocabulary acquisition, which we study alongside other variables, such as receptive and productive vocabulary in general, the lexical profiles of the students, and the influence of the first language or any other previous linguistic knowledge that they might have. CLI stands for cross-linguistic influence. We've also examined the relationship between textbook input and productive output as concerns vocabulary. We've examined the effects of age in vocabulary production. We've also looked into cultural aspects and emotion words, and very recently, and with the collaboration with the University of Extremadura, we have started to look into the relationship between vocabulary production and metaphorical competence. So there are different approaches to the the phenomenon of, or to the relationship between vocabulary and bilingualism or multilingualism. So as Anna was saying before in the introduction, we've looked at this variable from a CLIL perspective. So from the perspective of educational bilingualism. We've also looked into the relationship of vocabulary and bilingualism from a different perspective, in which we had Spanish monolinguals, Basque or Spanish-Basque bilinguals who are learning English as a foreign language. We've examined the perspective of heritage bilinguals. I will come back to that in a minute. We've tried to compare different groups of bilinguals, monolingual or traditional monolinguals, educational bilinguals, and heritage bilinguals. And we've also tried to examine the idea of bilingualism by looking into learners who are bilingual in different foreign languages, so who are not only learning English as a foreign language, but also other languages such as French as a foreign language or German as a foreign language. Specifically, in our most recent research and in the present project, we look into the relationship between vocabulary production and bilingualism from a heritage bilingual perspective, where we looked into what we call local learners, or what we have also called traditional bilinguals, so students who have Spanish as their home language and are learning English as a foreign language at school, and learners which we call heritage bilinguals, who have not only Spanish as a native or first or second language, but who also have a home language, who speak another language at home and are learning English as a foreign language. Here we're usually talking about learners from mainly immigrant origin who have a main language at home, use Spanish as the language of school and socialization, and learn English as a foreign language as a school subject, mainly. So far, studies that have been conducted mainly in Germany and also elsewhere give indefinite results. The most striking result is that the advantages or the results that were being observed with other types of bilinguals were not present in studies which have heritage bilinguals as the focus of interest. Also, we've realized that heritage bilinguals are a very complex population, which is where people with different characteristics come together, and it is a very, very heterogeneous population. Also, we've realized in our classes that there is an increasing number of students with heritage orange, and this imposes an educational challenge for teachers, the stakeholders, and educational authorities, but also for us, for people who are doing research in the topic of second language acquisition and in teacher training, because most of us are involved in teacher training courses. So our own students, they say, the way in which we teach needs to change, because the demographics of our classrooms have changed. So we cannot be applying the same methods, the same ideas as we used to do maybe 20 years ago, because our students, our pupils are changing, and we need to address that changing ecology, the changing classroom. The objectives of our project, of the sub-project in La Rioja, are included in that slide. Mainly, we are interested in describing the relationship between productive vocabulary and the bilingualism variable. So the production of vocabulary in English as a foreign language in secondary education, but according to different perspectives, according to different variables, which are of the cognitive, psycholinguistic, and also sociocultural type. So specifically, we want to describe the productive vocabulary and determine English as a foreign language vocabulary size, to explore the nature of that vocabulary in terms of frequency, accessibility, prototypicability, and so on, identify cultural words, and also the strategies that learners use to get the message across, such as, for instance, resorting to cognates, lexical creations, semantic extensions, metaphorical extensions, and so on. We want to investigate the relationship between learners' learners' creativity, linguistic profile, heritage and non-heritage, and their vocabulary production, and analyze the organizational features of their lexicon. And finally, and this is the specific objective which links both sub-projects, we want to describe the production of metaphorical language and its relationship with productive vocabulary and creativity profile. And how are we doing that? So we're using different instruments, mainly the 6 instruments that you have there. We're using a vocabulary a test of vocabulary of productive vocabulary, which is based on frequency count. We're using a free writing task. We're using what we call a lexical availability test, which is of the semantic fluency task, the metaphorical competence test, a questionnaire, a creativity test, and a proficiency level test to control for the proficiency level in English as a foreign language. So I'm going to focus on the first 4, which are the ones which are specifically devoted to looking into the relationship between vocabulary, organization, and metaphorical competence. Very, very quickly, because I know you're all familiar with them, I'm going to show you a big screenshot of each of the tests. This is the productive vocabulary levels test, which you probably are familiar with. This is the one that we used. The one belonging to the 2,000 most frequent words, what is usually called the 2K level. We had students write a composition about climate change because we thought this is a topic which is popular among students and teachers. This is the lexical availability task or the semantic fluency task, where we had students respond to a series of stimuli in English and in Spanish. Okay, so the students had 2 minutes to write as many words as they could think of concerning the topic of, for instance, animals, food and drink, love, countryside, and so on and so forth. And these are 2 examples of the receptive and productive metaphorical competence test. Okay, which I'm not going to explain any further because Anna is probably going to talk about it with a little bit more detail. We use different instruments that help us look into the aspects, into the specific linguistic and lexical aspect that we are interested. We use applications, mathematical applications that help us look into graphs and graph metrics. I'm going to show you in a minute what a lexical semantic networks looks like. And through or with the help of these instruments, we're able to define the structures of the mental lexicon of the student, and through graph metrics such as density, diameter, modularity, we can compare the networks of the different students. So what are the lexical aspects that we're most interested in? We want to examine data from a quantitative and qualitative perspective. We're interested in token and type production, word frequency, word accessibility, which can also be defined or understood as availability or prototypicality, depending on how you define it. Generation frequency and position, vocabulary structures, we have to do with what I was talking about, the lexical semantic networks, and mainly the role and effect of previous linguistic knowledge in the formal acquisition of English as a foreign language. So some results, some very preliminary results that we've gathered so far, we could not find differences in lexical fluency or cognitive production between local and heritage learners. But generally, heritage learners, bilingual learners are a bit slower, so they produce fewer tokens, slightly fewer tokens. So we might think, this is a speculative, we might think that they might be slower accessing or activating their L3 lexicon in such a time control task. The lexical profiles of the bilingual learners are slightly more skewed towards lower frequency bands, slightly so. Maybe again, because they take longer, because words of lower frequency might take longer to produce. So they don't make it in the 2 minutes. There are no differences in the learning strategies used. And we've started to find differences concerning cultural words, which reflect the target culture, also the culture of socialization, but also the culture of origin. For instance, we find terms such as Ramadan, San Mateo, which is the local festivity in Logroño, kebab, or Spanish omelette. And very briefly, because I don't have much time, I'm going to show you some examples of what I was talking about when I mentioned the lexical semantic networks. These are examples of the English as a foreign language networks of local and heritage learners. Here in the preliminary examination, we don't find many differences, but it is true that communities in heritage learners are slightly less stable, less compact. Borders are a bit more blurred. You can see, for instance, that the words included in the communities are very clear in the local learners, but they are a bit less obvious or less evident in the heritage learners. However, differences are very, very small, and we see a lot of similarities. These are the networks of the concerning the prompt law, and we can see very big, which means they appear very frequently and very early in the task boyfriend and girlfriend, father and mother. We can see that in both networks. We can also see, and I love this, but chocolate, gift, ring, flower. We can see that in both networks. Heart and kiss, Valentine's Day, which I think is also a very interesting production. What else? Friend and family. This is also very striking. You can see how big the boyfriend, girlfriend, and the friend and family words are when answering to the prompt love, which I think is very beautiful. Okay, that you include friends and family on top of the list when you're talking about love. And very quickly, because this is not part of the main topic, but I wanted to show you, because this was very striking to me, I wanted to show you the networks of the local and heritage learners in Spanish as a foreign language concerning the prompt countryside. Here, and this is what was surprising for me, we can see that the networks of the heritage learners are much less stable, much less compact, than the networks of the local learners. And the example that that I found most interesting is the one concerning farm animals, for instance. In the local network, you can see that in yellow, we have different farm animals. Okay, different animals that are related to the countryside. Okay. And only animals. And there are no other animals in the other communities except for insects. Okay. However, if you look at the heritage network, communities are much more, much less compact, a bit poorer organized, we can say. And here we've got a mixture of animals and other concepts that are related to the farm, agricultor, tractor, agricultura, together with oveja, vaca, perro, you see. But then we also have gallina and cabra in another community, see? So the organization is slightly different. So some of the preliminary implications of our data are the following. We believe that the English as a foreign language class is an inclusive environment for immigrant students. They display similar levels of English as a foreign language vocabulary proficiency. So differences are not due to proficiency. In the second language, or in the foreign language rather, they've got a very similar semantic structure and categorization processes, but curiously enough, to me, they display more differences when they're tested in Spanish. And some qualitative differences that we found is that heritage learners display more heterogeneity. They have, there are differences concerning the cultural words included. Relationships are less stable in the heritage learners, and also their networks are slightly less compact, and communities are also slightly less organized. So, and thank you very much for listening. I don't want to. Okay.
Thank you very much, Pilar, for this very, very interesting presentation, for, you know, very comprehensive, and summarizing the whole project in 20 minutes was very difficult, and presenting some very interesting results, which I think about the semantic networks that I think are food for thought for many people. We have time for questions. So a couple of questions. Anybody would like to ask anything? Better. Hey, Marta, can you give the microphone? Yeah.
Hello, Mª Pilar.
Hi.
Nice meeting you.
Nice to see you.
I've got one question. You stressed in your presentation that you cannot kind of replicate these bilingual advantages, you know, that have been found in many other places in the heritage communities, apparently, right? As far as lexical, I mean, production is concerned. Now that ties in very nicely with findings we did in our research in Hamburg. Actually, I will talk about that later today. Do you have any, you know, ideas why this is the case? You know, why would these, you know, advantages not replicate in these particular studies or fields or domains, or what could be the explanations here?
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for your question. Actually, the studies that you conducted in Hamburg were an inspiration to us, and Anna and I were discussing them a lot. I was surprised at the heterogeneity of the groups in many respects, and the only plausible explanation that I can think of so far is that the foreign language classroom is a kind of leveling context where students of different origins and with different linguistic backgrounds and also social, cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds, they seem to be level. They seem to start from the same place. So that's the only plausible explanation that I can think of, because in linguistic terms, I don't know, because I was expecting more difference maybe in English because of the bilingual effect, and maybe less differences in Spanish, which is the L1 for some of them and the L2 for some others, but which I would not distinguish among local and heritage learners speaking in Spanish. I would not say that there are any differences when I look at them or when I talk to them. But these networks are very surprising to me. The fact that the differences that I was probably expecting in English are appearing in Spanish. So apart from that, special atmosphere that we have in the English as a foreign language class, where we kind of get immersed in a different world, in a different culture, where everybody uses the same foreign language, and apart from that, I don't know. I don't know what other explanations can be brandished for that lack of differences. I don't know if this answers your question.
Thank you.